Namaste. This is Vijaya Vishwanathan from Infinity Foundation. Today I have a very interesting guest from Boston. His name is Shri Narasimha Rao. Shri Narasimha Rao, welcome to the show. Namaste.
Namaste Vijayaji and namaste to the audience. Thank you for having me here.
Shri Narasimha Rao is very interesting because he is a man of science and a practitioner of Jyotisha. So I'm just going to read out a little bit about Sri Narasimha Rao's background. PVR Narasimha Rao has a bachelor's degree from IIT, so he's an IIT graduate. Did his undergraduation in IIT Madras, and then he moved on to doing his master's from Rice University in computer science. And right now he lives in the greater Boston area, where he works works as a firmware manager at a top semiconductor firm. He received his Sanskrita Bhasha Kovida and Sanskrita Bhasha Visharada. And let me tell you this, he received it at the age of 11, the tender age of 11. So he has a way of combining his Sanskrit knowledge and his scientific temper to conduct fresh research into the teachings of the rishis. So he brings us, he makes us understand Jyotisham in a very modern light. So he has created the popular Jyotisha software called Jagannatha Hora, which is used by many Vedic astrologers, and he has created simple manuals for Vedic rituals that people can download from his website, which is called vedicastrologer.org. So Shri Narasimha Rao, you've done a lot, and it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to this discussion with you.
Thank you. A small correction. At Rice University, I had my master's in electrical engineering, not computer science.
So the first question, Sri Narasimha Rao, is, we've all been sort of attracted by Jyotisham, but there hasn't been a proper view on whether this is science or this is just some feel-good science. So, because you're a man of science, I wanted to ask you, what is your take on Jyotisham? How do you approach Jyotisham with all your background in modern science and technology, and then this ancient science of Jyotisha?
Let us take a step back. When we use the word science, science can mean different things to different people. There are hard sciences, there are soft sciences, there are pseudosciences. Let's use the Sanskrita word, which is Shastra. The Sanskrita word Shastra comes from the word Shastra. It means relating to Shastra. And Shastra really means an instrument. Even though people think it's a weapon, it's really an instrument. So Shastra is really an understanding of how to use specific set of instruments for a particular purpose. That is what a Shastra is. So there are various Shastras. Now Jyotisha Shastra, it is basically the instruments there are planets and signs and horoscope and how planets are moving with time and how they are placed at your birth and the correlation between those. You use those as instruments to basically get some idea into what the future holds for a particular person or a particular group of people. So from that perspective, you can see that it is a Shastra. Now let us discuss one more thing. If you look at yogic philosophy, any understanding, any movement in consciousness is basically tied to three channels: the Sushumna Nadi, Pingala Nadi, and Ida Nadi. Pingala Nadi is the solar channel of perception, and Ida Nadi is the lunar channel of perception. The solar channel of perception deals with logic and structured thinking, going through something in a structured way, whereas the lunar channel or the Ida Nadi deals with emotional, intuitive, that kind of approach, unstructured approach to understanding the world around you. Whereas Pingalnadi is about understanding the world around you in a structured manner. But what the rishis teach is the real perception of the universe comes from the Sushumna Nadi, which is in the middle, which is closed in most people. And that comes only when there is a balance between the Ida Nadi and the Pingal Nadi, between the solar and the lunar channels. So for the last millennium or so, there is a lot of emphasis on sciences or sastras that are rooted in the Pingala Nadi, in the structured thinking. You want a clear structure, something well defined. There is a formula, and you derive something, you prove something, and that is important. But the thing is, Indian sastras, the ancient sastras, combine the Pingal Nadi and Ida Nadi. So there is also a role for intuition and emotion. You can't really completely make it logic based. So that way, astrology is a more complete sastra because it combines. There is a role for intuition, and there is also a role for logical thinking. There are planets and signs, and they stand for certain things, and those are all well defined. But in the end, there are a lot of possibilities. From infinite possibilities, it allows you to boil down to a small set of possibilities, and within that small set, to pick the right thing based on the desha kala patra of the person, you need to use your intuition also. So astrology is a subject, Jyotisha Sastra is a subject that allows you to combine both the logical thinking and the intuitive thinking. And one point here, obviously people know that there is a lot of role for intuition in astrology. So there is an artistic part, but people wonder, is there a rational part? Is there a logical part? Is there a structural part to astrology that actually makes sense, that actually works? And that is something that I actually struggled with when I was growing up. My father, Sri Pingal Venkata Subramanya Chalapati Rao, was a very good astrologer. I have seen him make amazing predictions. Actually, I never saw him make a wrong prediction. I made several wrong predictions, but I never saw him make any wrong predictions in my life. So I saw him and I realized that, yeah, there is something interesting about this science. And I started learning when I was 7. And every year, every summer, I used to focus on astrology. And then throughout the year, I used to forget and go back in the summer and restart it. And when I went to IIT Madras for my bachelors, for my BTech, I really lost faith in astrology. Basically, what I thought is, you know that rationally, there are twins and triplets who are born just 2 minutes or 3 minutes apart. And I know some twins who are totally different. Their life trajectories are so different. But astrologically, most astrologers use chart known as Rasi chart, which is the same for everybody born in a 2 hour window. And there is a chart called Navamsa that very few astrologers use. And that chart is the same for everybody born in a 14-minute window, roughly. So twins will have the same Rasi and Navamsa chart. They will have the same dasha. They will have the same gochara or transit of planets. So, but we know for a fact that there are many twins who are different. So I said there aren't enough degrees of freedom here for it to be a science in the modern understanding, basically as a structured science. So I questioned it, but the fact that my father was so successful made me wonder maybe there is something here.
Differences in twins who are born 2 to 3 minutes apart? Did your father make it sort of a more refined?
My father never dealt with those examples, but when I, as a scientifically inclined person, when I basically looked at, are there enough degrees of freedom in this approach, I realized that there are twins who are totally different, but they have the same chart. So it's basically a conceptual. It's not that I saw a particular chart and I was wondering what's going on here. Conceptually, it did not make sense. It did not add up, basically. So I was inclined towards believing that it's more of an art than a science. And perhaps if you take the charts of twins to my father, his intuition will lead him to say different things based on whatever factors are influencing his intuition. So I tended to believe that intuition has a bigger role to play than rational or logical thinking in astrology. That was my thinking when I was in my teens and early 20s. And after my master's at Rice University, I went back to India. I was there for a year before leaving India again to settle down abroad permanently. So during that year, I focused a lot on astrology. I spent a lot of time with my father. I learned the principles from him again. And this time I was really serious, very committed. Also, one good thing I did is I went back to some old classics which are written in Sanskrita. I realized I was surprised to find that even though people use only Rasi and Navamsa chart, there are 16 different charts that Parashara Maharshi, the father of Vyasa, he defined. And those charts, one of those charts will change every roughly 24 seconds or so. So unless you have the birth time within 24 seconds, those two people are basically different. So then I went and looked at the charts of some twins. I collected the charts of some twins who had major differences in their lives. And things were starting to make sense, things were starting to add up. But I realized that the teachings of Parashara were not translated accurately. There were a lot of errors in the translations because the people who translated those were Sanskrit scholars without understanding of the subject and the nuances of the subject. And the people who had understanding of the nuances of the subject, because we moved away to the British way of learning, they abandoned Sanskrit and they just learned some principles as some thumb rules basically from their parents. So there was a gap between knowledge of Sanskrit and knowledge of the astrological principles. So I basically said, forget about what books say. Let me go back to the Sanskrita text and let me take a fresh look at things and interpret it. And apart from interpreting, if there are multiple possibilities for interpreting a particular verse, because rishis are not very clear intentionally, they don't spoon feed you. They basically say it in a mystical way so that there is a possibility for ambiguity intentionally, so that people who are not prepared for that knowledge will not be able to decipher it, and people who are prepared for it,
Have adhikaritvam for to receive that knowledge as well.
you need to have patrata. So rishis intentionally do that, and as you do sadhana and as you become spiritually mature and as you become ready, things that did not reveal themselves to you with the same words, suddenly it will just reveal to you, and once it reveals itself to you, yeah, this is it. There's no question about it. Why didn't I understand it before? So that's how I started reading the text of Parasara. It's called Bruh.
What books did you necessarily read? And it was good that you had a base in Sanskritam. You had already done some very advanced level exams at an age of 11, so that probably helped you. But what books did you actually read?
Yeah, I read some modern books written by Dr. B.V. Raman, Bengaluru Venkatraman, who is a legend in astrology also. But the books that really opened my eyes, because even he used mostly Rasi and Navamsa charts, even though he defined the other charts known as divisional charts and said these are very important, he never really used them. He never really illustrated their use. But when I went back to Parasara, there is a book called Brahat Parasara Horasastram. To me, that is basically everything in Jyotish. If you have that book, you don't need anything. All the other books that were written in the last couple of millennia by modern authors like Dr. B.V. Raman or Sri K.N. Rao or Pandit Sanjay Rath or even myself, are relatively old books written in the last 2000 years, like books by Mantreshwara, Kadidasa, Vaidyanath Dikshita. All these books are good, but they are not at the same level as Parasara's book. Parasara, before the Kali Yuga was about to start, father of Vyasa, Maharshi Parasara, he basically put down all the knowledge that he thought would be relevant in the Kali Yuga. It's called Bruhat Parasara Hora Shastram. That is really like the Bible of astrology, if I may use that word. It has everything that other books are like subsets. It is like a superset. For example, I'll give you an example. There is people use dashas. People say I'm running Venus dasha, I'm running Sun dasha. Basically, life is divided into various phases, and each phase is controlled by a particular planet. And within the phase, there are sub-phases that are controlled by a secondary planet. So you have dasha, antardasha, period, sub-period, like that. So people assume that there's only one dasha system. The Vimshottari dasha is what most people use today. But if you look at Parasara's teachings, he taught tens of dashas. There are nakshatra dashas based on stars, dashas based on signs. There are variety of dashas, and he did not clearly say when to use what dasha and for what purposes to use what dasha, but he gave some hints. There are ample hints there for an intelligent person to do contemplate on it and do experiments and figure out what is the real use of dasha. So what I'm trying to say is there is a lot of wealth, and after spending 25 years really focused on astrology, apart from my work, I really dedicated a lot of my time to astrology for 25 years. I can say that I probably deciphered between 1 to 5% of what Parasara taught.
How many people today actually study Parashara Maharishi's work?
Lot of people actually study it. Lot of people study it. The only thing is, like I said, because things are not really very direct, there is some coding involved. There is some indirect language involved there. Not everybody is successful in deciphering, but luckily there are a lot of young people who are and scientifically inclined people who are getting into astrology these days. And one good thing I did during this phase, during these 25 years, is I have background in programming. I basically created the software that you mentioned earlier, Jagannath Hora. I just put it online for free download. So a lot of people download it, and when they download it, they see, apart from Vimshottari Dasha, they see Ashtotri Dasha, Shodshottri Dasha. There are so many dashas. There are so many calculations. Apart from normal Lagna, there's a Ghati Lagna, Hora Lagna, Varnada Lagna. People wonder, what is this? what are these Arudapadas? What are these? What are these? Because it gives so many calculations, people become curious and then they go back and read the classics and try to do some research and play around. And whatever they find, they share with other people. So, what I feel is in the last 10 years or so, there is a renaissance in Jyotish with people basically going back to Parashara's texts and trying to basically also form a network. And even though there's no formal association or anything, have an informal network and share their findings with other people, and people trying to validate the findings of other people. So there is some hope. So to answer your question, I went a long way, but to answer your first question, I believe that as Parasara Maharshi taught, astrology, Jyotish Shastra qualified to be a science even based on modern understanding of the world. But unfortunately, in the last 2 millennia, because we went through a really deep Kali Yuga during this phase, most of the subtle understanding was lost and it was reduced to being an art. But I have a lot of hope that we are on the cusp of a renaissance where we will rediscover Jyotish as a science in the coming
Yeah.
decades.
Okay, I want to tell the audience that towards the end of this program, we will get some predictions from Shri Narasimha Rao on the current situation and politically in India as well as in the US and regarding COVID as well. So the next question I wanted to ask you, Shri Narasimha Rao, is the whole idea of Prashna. See, I live in Chennai where we have Kapali Koval, a temple dedicated to Lord Kapali. And oftentimes we hear that there is a prashna done where the presiding deity, which is Lord Kapali there, will answer some questions about the temple, about the vidhi of the puja, about the worshippers that come. So tell us about prashna. What is prashna in Jyotisham, and what does it answer and what does it take?
So there are different aspects of Jyotisha Shastra. Within Jyotisha Shastra, there are multiple groups, but within the predictive astrology, there are two parts. One part is natal horoscopy, Janma, based on the Janma Chakra, based on the time somebody was born. You look at the planetary position at that time, and that gives you insight into what kind of karmas are being carried by that person, and what is the momentum those karmas will take with respect to time as time moves on. So that is basically natal horoscopy. And then we have what is known as horary horoscopy, horary charts, which is basically prasna. Prasna literally means a question. You have a question in your mind that is bothering you and you want to find an answer to that question. And it doesn't have to be just about how things are happening at a temple. It can be about something that's happening in the world or something that's happening to a particular person. Somebody's birth chart may not be known. They may want to know a particular thing about their life. They may be thinking about something important and will it happen or not, or how it will happen. They may want some insight. So when you don't have access to the natal horoscopy, because natal horoscopy is a very evolved science, and that is what Parasara actually focused on. Parasara did not teach Prasna. As a matter of fact, the Prasna Shastra was not taught by Maharshis. It is basically based on books that were written in the last 2 millennia by other people, not rishis. So rishis focused really on the Janma Chakra, and that is basically very scientific. There are a lot of principles there, very well established and structured principles. But when it comes to Prasna, when you don't have access to those, you resort to a Prasna. And the idea behind Prashna is when I'm thinking about something, when I want to solve a problem, that effort to solve a problem has taken birth at that time. So it's like an entity, just like a human being. You can make a horoscope for collective groups of people, like a company being formed or a question being formed in your mind to be solved. So everything has a life of its own. Everything has some corresponding karmas that it is carrying with it, and the momentum that those karmas will take with time. So Prasasastra is basically essentially trying to decipher the influence of planets on your efforts to solve a particular problem. And if you see what the planets are telling you at that time, that gives insight into uh, what is the resolution to the issue that you are trying to solve. So there are two things there. You either use planets at the time you make the prasna, you make a chart just like Janma Chakra, a natal chart, but for the time when you had the question arise in your mind. So you make a chart for that. That is one approach. Another approach is you don't use a chart per se, but you look at your surroundings and you take various omens and you map them to planets, charts, signs in the zodiac, etc., and you basically read from that. Bottom line is, if you are willing to understand the world around you, nature is always sending you signs. So the basic principle behind Prashna is there are signs being sent to you by nature in terms of things around you, happenings around you, as well as the planetary position at the time when you actually thought of solving a particular problem. So you can combine those to have some insight. I want to say one thing here. Earlier I said that Prashna is typically used when you don't have recourse to Janma Chakra, but actually even when you have a Janma Chakra, even when you have accurate horoscope of a person, apart from the Janma Chakra, see how the dashas are, how the planets are transiting at this time, what are the karmas that are being invoked at this time, because different karmas will give their result at different times. So, what are the previous karmas that are likely to fructify at this point of time? So, that you can see from the natal horoscopy. But the problem is, you also have to take into account what the person has done since birth. The horoscope only tells you the karmas as captured at the time of birth, and the karmas that a person is doing are not static. Person is continuously doing karmas since birth. So after the birth, he may have done terrible karmas or really good karmas, and they will add to this karma pipeline, the pipeline of karmas, and they may basically modify, alter the way the karmas will fructify at this given point of time. So Prashna will give you insight into that.
Okay, so the question is, will when you say these karmas that you do can alter, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll all become sanchita to be fructified some other lifetime.
There are, like you said, there are three kinds of karmas: prarabdha karma, sanchita karma, and the agami karma. Prarabdha karma is literally, prarabdha means that has been begun basically. It comes from the root prarabh, means to begin, and it is the gerund form of that. So it means already begun. So that means the karma has already started fructifying. The arrow has left the bow of Rudra. So the karma has to give result in this life. So prarabdha karmas must give their result in this life. And sanchita karmas are the other accumulated karmas which may or may not give their result in this life. But prarabdha karma has to be experienced in this life. But the tricky thing is, exactly at what time it will be experienced is not really determined. Horoscope is not deterministic. Your destiny is not deterministic. So in this life, you are destined to experience particular kind of result, and it is optional to experience some other result. But imagine that there is a pipeline having a lot of balls in it. Okay, and these karmas are like the balls in the pipeline, the tube, and you basically they are all coming at a speed. So tube is, let's say, inclined down. They are all coming, and if you throw another ball into the pipe, if it is sufficiently large, it may basically push everything out and come out first, basically, if it has enough force. So in other words, every action that you're engaging right now, whether small or big, is a new ball you're throwing into the tube. And constantly these balls are being rearranged by the by God. And the order in which they come out can basically be modified a little bit. So it's not like you get rid of a karma or completely move it from prarabdha to sanchita, but you can alter the sequence in which things happen. Sometimes you can also alter the degree, the magnitude, because karma only says he needs to experience this kind of result, but the exact degree to which it will happen is basically variables. There is some variability there. So all these things basically can change. So, in other words, what I was trying to say is Janma Chakra doesn't capture all these things. All these things are after the Janma Chakra. So, when you make a Prashna Chakra at this point of time, this person is looking for a job. He doesn't have a job for the last 2 years. Will he find a job? When you make that Prashna, the Prashna will give you additional insights. Janma Chakra will show what kind of karmas he is carrying in the long run, and Prashna will give further insight on how things have happened over the last 20 or 30 years of the person's life, and you can combine the two to get a more comprehensive understanding of what is the current karmic trajectory for the person.
Okay, now tell us. You touched a little bit upon free will and destiny. So, can you further explain? Because if everything is, these karmic balls are all coming down the tube, and you did mention that there are things that you can do to, push one ball ahead of the other, and the degree at which by which it impacts you. So, talk to us about, yes, there is some bit of destiny from past karmas that we are facing, but there is also this free will component. So, talk to us about how astrology Jyotisha can actually help us, look at the free will component.
That is a great question because a lot of people get confused between free will and destiny. They think if astrology, if everything is predestined, then what's the point of free will? The thing is, not everything is predestined. Astrology doesn't tell you what happens to you. It tells you what kind of circumstances you will face for doing your karmas at this point of time. It basically your and destiny and free will are not really different things. Actions of free will in the past become your destiny now, and the actions of your free will right now becomes your destiny. They add to your destiny tomorrow. So destiny is nothing but the sum total of the actions of the free will up to this point of time, from minus infinity. So that's basically what destiny is. So they're not really different, and you do have a free will to do your karmas right now. But the problem is the destiny decides the circumstances in which you have to perform your new karmas, and some circumstances are so heavy, so problematic that your free will has very little scope. In other words, the degrees of freedom your free will has, the number of options your free will has available to it for doing the current action, are restrained or constrained by your destiny, which is basically actions of your free will in the past. So that is basically the problem. But the issue is many times people do have a lot of options, but because they only see what is right in front of them, they don't look all around them. They think that they don't have a lot of options. But when people take a step back and see what options they have, often they do have a lot of options. Unlike my analogy of throwing balls into the tube, if you every action that you do, whether it's a puja you're doing or helping somebody needy or just speaking to you right now, whatever we are doing, every action becomes a new ball that is thrown into this pipeline. And some of them are so small, so tiny that they don't alter whatever is ahead of them, but some of them can be significant enough to basically push their way through and alter the other balls and maybe break up other balls into multiple balls. So you do have a way to all, you can't alter your karmas, but you can alter the way they fructify, the sequence in which they fructify, and the degree to which they fructify. That you can alter.
Now, talk to us about the Jyotisha for an individual you talked about, but you also talk
Yeah.
about for the collective. There's a Vyashti, Samashti for a Desha. So how does that how do you apply Jyotisham to these different entities?
Right. So there are actually in Jyotisha Shastra traditionally there are three skandhas to the Jyotisha Shastra. There are three different limbs of it. One is called horoscopy, which is predictive astrology. As we discussed earlier, it includes natal horoscopy as well as horary horoscopy, making prashnas as well as individual horoscopes. So that is predictive astrology. That is called horoscopy. There is also something known as Ganita, or some people also call it Siddhanta. It is basically the astronomy part of astrology, which is finding out how planets are moving with time and having formulas so that you can compute the planetary positions. So that is the mathematical, completely structured and formulaic part of Jyotisha Shastra. So that is Ganita. And the third part is called Samhita. It is basically it is about seeing the collective destiny. And when we say collective, in a way, collective groups are also entities. They also are kind of like living entities, even though we don't see them that way. When somebody forms a company, that company becomes an entity. It has a life of its own, and it has the karmas that basically resulted in it being born. Those karmas will shape its future going forward. Similarly, when a country is formed, there are some karmas behind that country, and that country as an entity will be engaging in karmas continuously. So they become the karmas of that country. So you can basically look at countries and groups of people also as entities and make charts for those. So there, one thing you can do is you can make a Janma Chakra. For example, in the case of India, on August 15 midnight when India was formed, you can make a chart, and people do use that chart. So you can use the principles of uh, individual horoscopy, natal horoscopy with that chart. But in addition, shastras, like I said, there is a Jyotish Shastra limb known as Samhita. It gives various principles to see what happens to countries, states, districts, villages, etc. With time, you see when sun is entering various signs, or when sun and moon are conjoining in various signs, there are multiple charts, what we call as mundane charts, and this is known as mundane astrology in modern parlance. So you make those charts, and also apart from monthly, daily, fortnightly, and annual charts, there are also charts that work for 20-year period, and there is even a chart that works for about 300 years period. So there are multiple charts that give you insight into what happens at a particular place with a particular set of people over the next certain amount of time period. So we do have a lot of principles like that, and the beauty of that is when you are looking at the individual horoscope, the time is never known accurately. People will say I was born at 10:30, but it's probably 10:32 or 10:31 or 10:35. And like I told you earlier, you need the time within like half minute accuracy to really use the teachings of rishis and to really reduce the role of intuition and make it more systematic and scientific. You need a very accurate time, and that is not often available with individuals. But when you look at these charts that are cast when sun changes a sign or sun and moon conjoin, these are observable phenomena in the skies. So these charts can be made very accurately, and you can make it for the capital of the country that you are interested in, or the state that you are interested in, and that again that capital is known accurately. So you can make a very accurate chart. So you can actually make more accurate predictions in mundane astrology than with individual horoscopy, because you don't have to spend a lot of time making sure that the time is correct. The time is guaranteed to be correct. So it's a very interesting field. And so unfortunately, most astrologers spend a lot of time on individual horoscopy. Very few specialize in collective horoscopy, but it has a lot of excellent principles.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question on astrology itself as a subject. So, with the Western perspective, Drishti, you have mathematics, which is different from astronomy, which is different from Western astrology, which is almost like a pseudoscience. Nobody pays attention to it. Whereas in Bharata, you have Jyotisham, and then you have Ganita, and then astronomy, all tied in together as one science. So, talk to us about whether we should not be looking at it from the Western way when we look at Jyotisha.
Well, in India, we basically had our ancient tradition is we basically took a holistic view to everything, whether it's Ayurveda or yoga or Tantra, whatever it is, or Vedanta, whatever it is. All subjects, they were not basically islands of knowledge. Everything was connected. It's basically one whole connected unit of knowledge. That is the Indian approach. So the Ganita part of Jyotisha Shastra and the Samhita part and the Hora part were all interlinked. Not only this, forget about these three parts which are clearly limbs of the same Shastra known as Jyotisha Shastra. But take things like Ayurveda, take things like yoga, take, take things like Tantra. Jyotisha was in the old days intertwined with everything. It was not basically a separate subject used just to answer a few isolated questions from a few people. For example, when you look at Ayurveda, Ayurveda recognizes people of different body types, kapha, pitta, and vata, and basically you have various dhatus and it's a whole subject. But the thing is, Ayurveda has two components. One is diagnosing what the issue is with the person, and second is how to remedy that condition so that you can restore the original condition to the being. So when it comes to diagnosis, there are various methods, and astrology is one method. There are clear guidelines in the Jyotish Shastra to figure out what are the indications in a particular horoscope, whether somebody is likely to be a kapha person or kapha vata person, and also with change in time, how basically different doshas get aggravated, and also in what parts of the body or what dhatus those doshas are likely to manifest at a particular point of time based on the dashas. So there is a lot of knowledge there that used to be applied even in Ayurveda, and not only that, even for administering the medicines, because once you administer a medicine, how the medicine works within your body is basically that working of the medicine in your body is a new entity that is born at that time. It has a destiny of its own. So you want to make sure that that entity is endowed with a good horoscope. So you basically pick a good time for doing such things. So similarly in Tantra, when you want to do a particular sadhana, suppose there is a particular goal for the practice that you are engaging in, the ritual that you are doing. Based on the goal that you have in mind, certain times are more conducive and certain times are less conducive. And also based on your own horoscope, certain kinds of rituals are more conducive, certain kinds of devatas and certain types of mantras are more conducive. So you used to, in the old days, people did not distinguish astrology as a separate subject. And as a matter of fact, we did not have this modern education where you have math, physics, science, chemistry, like that. It was basically just understanding. It was understanding the Vedanga. So people used to learn a little bit of everything, and people who knew Tantra, Ayurveda, Yoga, etc., they were incorporating knowledge of Jyotisha Shastra in the old days. And now it is slowly picking up, but this really needs to be improved in coming years.
Okay, because even now, I don't know if many Ayurveda specialists actually
Yeah.
use Jyotisha. I mean,
Some do,
behind the
some
scenes,
do.
they will tell you,
Yeah.
yes, you can do it, but outside, they don't talk about it or advertise it
Yeah.
because it's considered sort of a pseudoscience.
Also, they have not many have a good understanding of all these subjects because unfortunately, in the old days, even 200, 300, 400 years back, people who were intelligent, they got into traditional knowledge. Now, you basically, just like me, I went into, even though I was interested in traditional subjects, I went to IIT, I had a modern education, I became an engineering manager, and that's how I basically make my money. And I do this in my private time, and that's what most people are doing. So, all the intelligent people are not really focusing their time on this. If, for example, people like me were able to focus on traditional subjects 100% of their time, so much more could have been done instead of doing it part time. So this is the problem. Because of this, all this holistic knowledge became islands of disconnected knowledge. But luckily, over the last decade or so, people are realizing the importance of having holistic understanding of our traditional subjects, and people are making progress towards that.
Okay, that's good to know. So one of the things that Rajiv always talks about is the idea of digestion by the West of certain shastras. Now, you see in the West that yoga is very popular, but Jyotisha isn't as popular as yoga. Now, I'm wondering if there are some inbuilt poison pills, as he calls it, because to be a practitioner of Jyotisha, you have to sort of subscribe to the idea of dharma and karma, and it's because the core, the whole shastra is based on karma, and what is karma. So dharma and karma are two sides of the same coin, and this is very so this is an inbuilt sort of poison pill that the West cannot take because it goes against everything that the Western perspective endorses. So do you think that is the case why Jyotisham hasn't been taken by the West, or do you see it changing? um, what is your view on that?
I have a slightly more nuanced view when it comes to that. The way I look at it, I see myself as a Sanatana Dharmi, not as a Hindu is a word coined by the invaders, Western invaders. I'm a Sanatana Dharmi, and Sanatana Dharma literally means the the one that is perennial, basically the sense of right and righteousness, which is perennial. So the way I look at it, people from India are exposed to Sanatana Dharma from a young age, but I did meet a lot of people in the West who are interested in Sanatana Dharma and who are as good in Sanatana Dharma as people I know from India. So I really truly believe that Sanatana Dharma is not restricted to a particular nation. It is available to the whole world. And as for the digestion concept of Rajiv ji, it is indeed a valid concern when you basically share knowledge with people who are not ready for it or who are not qualified for it. They can corrupt it and they can indeed digest it into their way of thinking and pervert it basically. As a matter of fact, Parasara,
For example, desacralize it. Now, yoga is practiced without saying Omkara. So you will take Ayurveda, even Ayurveda, the same thing, without taking that whole chikitsa of
yeah,
using Jyotisha is basically sidelined. And it's sort of desacralized and used.
yeah, right. The thing is, I won't blame only West for that. There is a part of East also, which is basically which thinks like the West, which has been brainwashed by the West over the last couple of centuries. So they also lost that holistic thinking. And what I was going to say was Parasara Maharshi at the beginning of his magnum opus, Burhat Parasar Horasastram, he very clearly said this knowledge should not be given to one who does not believe in the divine and one who does not believe in doing the right thing and one who is selfish. So there are certain criteria he gave. One has to be selfless, one has to be devoted to a concept of divine, and one has to have respect for the rishis, for the sages from whom this knowledge is coming. And moreover, this knowledge, even if I give a thumb rule, the ability to apply the thumb rule correctly, because like I said, there is an integration of structure versus unstructured intuition. There is an integration of two. So for them to work in unison, somebody needs to have the blessing. So somebody who's not really prepared, even if you try to enable them, they will really not get something so subtle as astrology. And coming to whether astrology has caught on in US or not, I know a lot of good astrologers, good jyotishis in the West. Initially when Srila Prabhupada came, some of his sishyas, I know they are really good in astrology, and they don't practice astrology that is disconnected from its spiritual roots. They really go to its deep spiritual roots and try to get a holistic understanding. So some of the best astrologers I know in the West are actually whites. They are Caucasian people, and I know a few.
No, no, and when I said East versus West, and Rajiv also makes this statement that it's not about the race, it is about the drishti. Because there are many, as he calls them, that are brown skinned but who are.
I understand that. I understand that he makes that point, but it's sometimes lost on people. They look at it as a East versus West thing, but it's not really about people. There are people who gel with the Eastern methodology, Eastern thinking in the entire world, and similarly there are people who gel with the modern Western thinking, non-holistic thinking in the entire world, including India. So really, this is a clash between holistic approach versus the disconnected modern scientific approach. And I think we made a lot of progress in the last decade or so, and I'm sure astrologically that in the next decade or two there'll be more progress.
Now, what happens when you do perform a C-section and give birth? So, how is timing uh, determined for a jiva that way?
Yeah. So sastras actually give a clear guideline on what is the definition of the birth time, and that is based on the yuga you are living in. So for Satyuga or Pratyuga, the definition was Sirodarsana. When you see the head of the person through the yoni, the person hasn't come out yet, but you see the head. The head is basically exposed to the outside world. That is basically the time of birth. Like that, there are Bhupatana, Sirodasana. There are different definitions given for different yugas. And for Kali Yuga, the definition that the rishis have given is when the first breath occurs. So
Uh,
you can, in a C-section, you can control the time when the body is taken out, and you can even control the time when the umbilical cord is cut. But the time when the first breath occurs, that you cannot really control. That may happen after a minute or after several seconds. And like I said, even 24 seconds is enough to change the destiny of the person. So so bottom line is you have to see the time when the first breath occurs. And often people basically take the first cry as the time when the first breath occurs, but it's not guaranteed. It's very close to it, but it's not guaranteed. But I will tell you one thing. Even if somebody uses the correct definition and has a calibrated watch and he's basically noting the time, it is likely that something he has used a slightly wrong time. It is possible that the time is wrong. So we astrologers never really assume that the time that we are given is accurate. So whether it's a C-section or a normal birth, if somebody says the birth occurred at 10:30, you basically see 10:35, 10:25 to 10:35 or 10:20 to 10:40 and go back and see events that happened in the life and see if they make sense or not, reverse engineer and see is it really 10:30 or should it be 10:27 or 10:34. So you have to do that anyway, irrespective of whether it's a C-section. But the principles, I saw charts of many people with C-section. The principles do work in those cases also.
now, tell us about palmistry, and so what is your opinion? Where does palmistry, fit into this whole landscape of Jyotisha?
Yeah, I'm not really an expert in palmistry, but the thing is, there are many ways of divination. Like I said earlier, if you are really curious to help somebody and you want to understand what is likely in store, nature will give you various signs. And sometimes just omens are enough, like in the case of Prashna. And people do things like tarot card readings, and they can make good predictions with that also. So in general, if you are interested in helping somebody, nature is always willing to guide you. So there is more art to some of these subjects. But the thing with palmistry is the various signs and planets are mapped to your hand. So again, I know some people who can, from the hand, they can map out the horoscope, at least the rashi chart, even though not all the subtler charts that I mentioned earlier, 16 charts that Rishi talked about. And I know some people who can do a pretty good job. They get like 80% of the chart right. So it seems to me like there is some correlation between certain signs on your hand versus your planetary positions in your horoscope. But I'm not really an expert in that. But I want to say one thing. We lost all this holistic subject, not only palmistry, but even the Swarodaya Shastra, your breath. Right now, my Pingal Nadi is stronger than the Ida Nadi. So depending on which nostril is more open, because we go through this cycle of different nostrils being open for a certain period of time, and accordingly, your solar channel of structured thinking or lunar channel of intuitive thinking will be stronger, and certain activities are more suitable for that time. And this is also tied to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in the modern science. So, which activities are more suitable? There is a clear Shastra for that known as Swarodaya Shastra, and some people use that for Prashna also. You can clearly see which nadi is more open, and also which bhuta out of the Panchabhutas which is more open which is more active at a particular time, and you can use it to answer the question. So there is lot of holistic understanding that is all lost now. We need to reconstruct all of that.
And how much of sadhana is required by the Jyotisha himself, to be able to do this on a sustained basis uh, with good accuracy?
First of all, like I said, there are two parts of astrology. One is intuition and the other is structured thinking. So for structured thing, there are a lot of formulas given by rishis. Unfortunately, they're not fully understood by people. They're only partially understood. But with effort and with the same scientific approach you use in modern science, modern scientific research, we can basically refine that. But the other equally important part is intuition. And obviously that intuition will require doing a lot of spiritual sadhana. I told you earlier that my father, I never saw him make a wrong prediction. He used to spend 2 3 hours every day doing various sadhanas, and he had one sadhana that is very difficult to do in Kali Yuga, which is never speaking lies. He never, even in very inconvenient times, he never spoke lies, and he always was truthful. So having some sadhana like that, having some spiritual practice will really help. And I know some astrologers who make excellent predictions even though they are not spiritually inclined and don't do sadhana, but that is basically sadhana from the previous lives carrying into this life as their fortune. But in general, you are better off doing sadhana. And apart from enabling your intuition to work effectively, there is another very important point that astrologers have to remember, which is I told you earlier that you have this karmic pipeline and you are always throwing new balls into the pipeline of karmas with the actions that you are engaging in right now. Astrologers' action of helping somebody, giving some suggestion. Oh, you are looking for a job. It's unlikely that you will get a job in the next 2 months. Actually, take a course now to refresh your resume and then try after 2 months. Suppose I give that advice to somebody, that advice may alter his momentum of karmas. It may alter the trajectory of his karmas. It is basically changing the pipeline of his karmas. So my act of giving an advice itself is a new karma for me. So this karma has an impact on somebody else's karmic pipeline playing out. So it will become a karma for me. And especially if you do it with kartrutva bhava, in other words, with a sense of doership. I am doing. I am a great astrologer helping people. If you do that, and even if you pretend to be humble, even if you are genuinely humble, there is some percentage of ego there. Without it, you cannot function in this world. So there is that sense of ownership over that karma, and because of that, that becomes a new karma for you. So astrologers, knowingly or unknowingly, are constantly accumulating new karmas. So at least to take care of those karmas, so that they don't get in trouble in a future life, they really need to do a lot of sadhana.
Okay, that's interesting. Talk to us. You spoke about Prashna, but there is also this Nadi Josium, which is very popular in the south. Uh, what is Nadi Josium? They say that these are records that are written years ago about every person and their future. So tell us about Nadi Josium. How authentic is it? What is your view on it?
So there are two parts. One is there are Nadi Granthas that give specific predictions for various people, and then there are some classics that give you some principles using which you can make predictions. So, for example, there is a book called Devakeralam, also known as Chandrakala Nadi, that gives various principles. This is from the last couple of millennia. This is again not linked to rishis. This is in the last 2 millennia. But the interesting thing with this book is it divides each zodiacal sign into 150 parts. And I earlier told you that Parasara taught 16 different charts that you can look at apart from the Rasi chart. So it basically combines those 16 charts and takes quanta of sign where one of those charts is different. So when you find quanta where at least one of those 16 charts are different in a sign, you come up with exactly 150 parts. So it basically divides a sign into 150 parts, and based on that, based on which part a planet is placed in or a house is placed in, it will give various predictions. So there is a collection of various principles in a book, but most people don't use that anyway because that requires you to have a very accurate horoscope within 24 seconds. What most people mean by Nadi Jyotisham is they go to a Nadi person, and he has a Nadi Grantha. There is like Agastya Nadi, various rishis basically. So these granthas are written by Rishi and his sishyas. Some disciples sat down, they anticipated, God knows using what principles, they anticipated that 2000 years later or 1500 years later, somebody will come with this horoscope, this exact horoscope with questions, and they basically gave down various past things and also future things. So they ask, first they have to locate your page there. They ask you various things. Some people take your fingerprint and use that, and some people ask your name, your father's name, your mother's name, and some specific questions about your past, like what kind of job you're doing, what is your wife's name, etc. So based on that, once they locate the page, most often you may not be able to locate the page accurately, but once they locate the page, I know many people who got very accurate readings about their past and also in some cases about their future, things that actually happened. So this is basically a collection of horoscopes that were written down by some people in the past. But the problem with Nadi Jyotisha is, and based on my experience, I don't have a direct experience, but experience of people I know directly, I know that there are genuine Nadi Granthas out there. And the people who are operating those are non-commercial and they are basically doing it as service. But always when there is something genuine, there'll be something fake alongside it because this is Kali Yuga. So there are people who market Nadi Granthas and they don't really have any good Nadi Grantha, and they use unscrupulous means to know some things about people who are coming to them. So basically they convince the people and then they give some predictions, and people who went to such people, the predictions don't come true. So the bottom line is the there seems to be something genuine there, but it's not really reliable in the sense that you don't know for sure if the person is genuine or not. If you know that there is a person who's operating an Adi Gandha who's really genuine, you can benefit from it. Otherwise, I basically advise staying away from it. And moreover, as a scientifically inclined person, I'm more interested in finding the principles using which I can make such predictions rather than taking a compendium of predictions written long back.
Now tell us about Bhrigu Samhita now and past lives.
Yeah, there are some principles in Bhrigu Samhita again that basically show, correlate what past life karmas will give their results in this life, etc. But I want to make one point here. There are 18 seeds of Jyotisha. Bhrigu is one of them. But the Shastras say that for Kali Yuga, the main seed is Parasara Maharshi, father of Vedavyasa. So Bhrigu Samhita does have some valid principles, some very useful principles, some I used to, but we are really better off given that we haven't completely understood the teachings of Parasara, who's really the seed for the age we are living in. We will be better off spending our efforts trying to decipher what Parasara taught. He specifically says in many places, there is a lot of subtle science here, but the intellectual pygmies of Kali Yuga will not be able to figure it out. So this is what is appropriate for them, he specifically says. So we intellectual pygmies of Kali Yuga should focus on that.
What is your whole view on Parihara when it comes to Jyotisham? What is its role? What are the typical things that you prescribe to people who come to you? How does it work?
Yeah, so Parihara remedial measures is another important thing, important part of astrology. So if you say this is your problem, it doesn't really help the person. If you say it will continue for 2 more years, it doesn't really help the person. It may help. It will prepare the person to basically be there for the long haul instead of expecting some quick result and being disappointed. So having some diagnosis of and prognosis of when things may improve will help. But really, to accelerate that process, what can you do? That will be really helpful. So there are various remedial measures. And obviously, one of those is doing various rituals, like doing uh, sadhana with specific mantras, and then also doing homa, things like homas, going to specific temples. Those things do help. But there are also, for people who are not inclined into, who are not ritual oriented, there are also things like helping other people, because any new karma that you do, like I said earlier, it will alter the pipeline of your karmas, and it may change the way things play out. Your previous karmas will play out currently. So from that point of view, every karma you put in, whether it's helping somebody or doing a sadhana, everything is useful. So some people may suppose your Mercury is problematic. So you may want to, for Mercury it is Vishnu, so you may want to chant Vishnu Sahasram, or Mercury also shows knowledge. So maybe you want to make a big donation to a library or help an academic institution. So there are various approaches. And one beauty of what our rishis taught is, they never said, thou shalt do this. They basically said, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. They always gave umpteen options. Rishis were never really rigid in their attitude. They gave so many options. So there are a lot of options. And astrology does, the horoscope does tell you what are the areas. Like, is it better to help somebody living in a slum, or somebody who's maintaining a library, or maybe for somebody helping the police will be a better remedy. So we can give some insight into what kind of humanistic activities will be more conducive, will balance your karmas basically better, and also what kind of deity will be more helpful to you, either Vishnu or Kumaraswamy.
Uh, how do you reconcile going to specific temples and visiting specific deities, right? How does that, with your scientific approach, what do you think happens?
Various temples have different kinds of energy. If you take a Subramanya temple, it has a different kind of energy compared to if you take a Venkateswara temple, it has a different kind of energy. So what our rishis did is they mapped various energies that are there at different places and times with the planetary combinations. And the other thing is, the specific kind of rishis or yogis may have done sadhana at a particular place. For example, if you take Rameshwaram, Patanjali did a lot of sadhana there. Like that, there are places where specific kind of sadhana was done. So accordingly, there is a specific kind of energy there. And if you can correlate that energy with planetary combinations, you know what kind of planetary energy your mind is under control of at a particular point of time. The problems that you're facing is because your mind is under, your consciousness is grabbed by a particular graha or a particular graha combination. So what is the kind of energy that is required to break the shackles, or not even break the shackles, direct that energy in a more positive way? The same energy that is clogging your consciousness can basically open up and make you do something productive if you direct it properly. And for that, you may need a specific kind of energy. And all these energies were mapped, and they basically are seen from the horoscope. But one thing I want to say here, all the principles of how to interpret combinations in the horoscope to see which devatas are more suitable for people, and which kind of sadhanas and which kind of temples are more suitable for people, are not fully understood, because again there's a lot of corruption in this kind of, all the subtle and spiritual aspects of astrology have been corrupted in the last 2 millennia, especially the last millennium. So we are rediscovering by going back to the teachings of Rishi. There is another important point I want to make. The other way, apart from altering your existing pipeline of karmas and delaying some bad karmas from giving their result and accelerating some good karmas to give their results, these remedial measures also help in another very, very important thing. The thing with the karmic pipeline is, when you experience the results of your previous karma, obviously nature has to choose somebody as an instrument to give the fruit of your karma to you. So your wife or your boss or your friend or somebody will be used as an instrument to give the good or bad results to you. So when somebody does something to you, of course, if they identify with that action, that becomes a new karma for them, but that's their headache. As far as I am concerned, I am getting the fruit of my own karma. Instead of accepting it as what God is giving me for my own karma, I start thinking this person is bad, he's mean to me, he's so bad. So there is new action, mental action, sometimes even physical action, that basically further adds to the karmic pipeline. In other words, while facing the fruits of previous karmas, you engage in new bad karmas because you resist those karmas and you are unhappy with those karmas and you want to take revenge on somebody for that. So it becomes a new karma in your pipeline. So at least when you do sadhana, it creates a state of mind where you can accept the results of previous fruits without complicating that karmic pipeline. So that is another very important point that people forget.
Okay. See, every unit of time we use in Jyotisha corresponds to some astronomical cycle. So, how did this concept of a week, saptaha, come into the Indian framework?
Okay, it is related to the grahas. But when I use the graha, people understand them as planet. But planet is again a modern word. And for example, sun is not a planet, moon is not a planet. The word we use in Sanskrita is graha. Graha literally means graha iti graha, the one that grabs. So, with their experience, with their direct perception, rishis realized that various objects in celestial objects in the skies that are close to us have an impact on how our consciousness functions. They grab hold of our consciousness in different ways. So, sun is not a planet; he's a star, and then moon is a satellite of Earth, and then there are five planets. Uh, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Mars, these planets. So these are the seven grahas that were identified as rishis as having a strong influence on our consciousness by resonating with various aspects of our consciousness. Actually, sun is our resonates with our soul, moon is our mind. That is why our mental states, our soul is always stable. It may see sun, he shines for half of the day and he doesn't shine for half of the day, but he's always there. He doesn't basically have phases. Similarly, our soul, it may express itself or it may not, it may be remain hidden, but it is always there, fully resplendent and giving light to our mind. But the mind, it is on and off. One day it is happy, one day it is sad. So that is why our minds resonate with moon. Our spirit of action, spirit of doing something aggressive or energy, basically, that is basically resonating with Mars. Our spirit of learning and understanding the world around you resonates with Mercury. Our wisdom and knowing right from wrong within our consciousness resonates with Jupiter. And our sense of happiness, being happy with what is around us, resonates with Venus. And our sense of working hard resonates with Saturn. So they map various aspects of our consciousness to the seven planets, and then basically they came up with a cycle of 7 days, which are associated with the seven planets. Not only this, there are 24 hours in a day, and these 24 hours in a day are associated with these planets in the orbital order, in the order in which in the decreasing order of speed with respect to Earth. Saturn is the slowest, then Jupiter, then Mars. So there is an order, logical order. In that order, the planetary hours are controlled. And when you do 24 modulo 7, you see that 24 modulo 7 is 3. So when you take that order, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, etc., you take every three planet, you get the ruler of the weekday. So you can actually, I won't go into the details and bore you now, but you can derive Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, then Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, exact order based on the modulo 3 thing.
This is based from Indian Jyotisha, or where did this
This is
come
based
from?
on Indian Jyotish principles. Well, actually, I want to take a step back here. Forget about weekdays. There are a lot of aspects in Indian astrology which are found in various other astrologies. If you look, but the thing is, nobody has everything Indian astrology has. If you take what Indian rishis start, it is like a superset. And if you take Greek astrology, they have concepts of dashas, etc. They have some samhita concepts like we do. And if you take Chinese astrology, they have some nakshatra based principles, nakshatra concepts. Similarly, when you go to Mayan astrology, if you go to Persian astrology, all of them have certain good concepts which actually do work to some extent. But the thing is, they're all like small subsets, and Indian astrology is the superset of everything. So I will not be surprised if all whole world was connected like 6,000, 7,000 years back, and after a great war like the Mahabharata war of 3000, around 3100 BC, after a great war, people basically lost contact and civilization basically was split into different islands of knowledge, and certain aspects of knowledge based on who was the main person there, certain aspects of knowledge basically flourished in that part of the world. So I will not be surprised if something like that happened.
Okay. Do you think the a rashtra or a country should use Jyotisha. So, should India use Jyotisha to make big decisions on policy, on when and how to go in for war? And do you actually think that Modi ji used, the dates for lockdown and opening and all that? You think it has any correlation with astrological significance?
I am not in the know of who is guiding Modi ji and what he's doing. So I don't know if Modi ji himself looks at astrology or not. But the thing is, I know for a fact that our kings in the old days, they did have court astrologers who were very learned and who had a holistic understanding of astrology, and they did help. Like I said earlier, astrology was used in Ayurveda, Tantra, Yoga, etc. Obviously, it can be used in Rajniti also. You can have an anticipation of how economy is going to function for change with time, whether the good times or bad times were in store, so that you can take some preventive measures instead of basically reacting after the fact. So you can know things about economy. You can know things about what your neighbors and other countries are up to, when somebody may engage in an aggression. For example, in 1998, I believe, before the Kargil War, a couple of months before the Kargil War, in a magazine called Express Storyteller, I wrote a magazine in which I wrote, between after I think after May 18 until July or so, there is a strong chance that India will have face an aggression from a foreign country. But this time, world will support India, and this will result in India winning. And actually, Kargil War happened, I think, May 25 or so that year. So there are clear principles in our astrology that can tell you some major event that may happen. So I see nothing wrong. As a matter of fact, it is highly desirable for the leaders, political leaders, to make use of astrology. But unfortunately, because astrology has a stigma of being a superstition, and part of it is deserved because there are a lot of quacks. For every one good astrologer, there are 100 quacks. And though they are really commercial and they just want to mint money from people, they're very unscrupulous. So that is why, and also really good people really did not get into this subject. They got into modern education. So all the holistic connections were lost. So that is there is some justification to it. But given that astrology is on the cusp of a renaissance, and we are seeing a renaissance for the last decade, I think it will be a good idea for countries and especially for India to encourage astrology, encourage astrologers, and make sure that astrology flourishes and they benefit from that flourishing knowledge of astrology. It will be a very good idea.
Now let's move on to some predictions. I'm sure our viewers will be looking forward to that. So let's start with India first. What do you predict for India in terms of uh, the political side and Modi ji? Let's talk about the political aspect of Indian governance.
So I really believe, based on Modi's chart, I really believe that India is in good hands. I actually predicted very early in his first term itself. My prediction was that he's a really sincere and genuine and dharmic person, and he will. My prediction was that he will win the second term, also the third term, and he will win the second term even stronger than the first term, and third term also very strongly. He will win 3 terms. My prediction was that second term will be the most important one because he will accomplish a lot of major reforms and major things during the second term. And also, what I predicted was that in his second term, world will be in a very turbulent and chaotic phase. Lot of bad things will be happening in the world, and during the turbulent and chaotic phase, Modi ji will lead India with a capable leadership, and India will be very fortunate to have him in particularly in the second term. And my prediction was also that he will win the third term very comfortably, and he will not complete the term, and he will voluntarily transfer the reins of power to a younger leader, and he will take sannyasa from politics. He will denounce politics and he will focus on his spiritual sadhana, and that is what I see from his horoscope. But I do believe that India is in very good hands. And one thing I want to say is I have been predicting since for 2 decades before 2000 that between 2000 and 2030, this is based on a very long-term mundane chart, between 2000 and 2030, world will go through a geopolitical transformation, the kind of which we haven't seen any time in our lifetimes. And this is not a once in a century or once in a decade transformation. This is a once in millennia transformation. So there will be a major transformation. And as a result of this transformation, US, which is unquestioned number one in the world, will become like what happened to UK in the 1950s and 1960s. It will be still powerful, but it will be a second rung power like what happened to UK. And China, which seems to be a challenger to US supremacy in the world, will have a big rise and then just implode under the weight of its own rise and due to internal rebellion and also picking fights with various other countries. So I expect that China will, as a matter of fact, when I predicted it long back, it did not make sense to people, at least to people that know me. They said, how can China really collapse? But now there are some indications with the coronavirus. China lost all the goodwill with the world, and a lot of countries are talking about over reliance on China and moving manufacturing, etc., away from China. So what I predicted is between specifically 2015 to 2025, the changes will be most drastic, and particularly after 2019 June, there is for over a decade period of time, 2019 to 2030 or so, there is a chance of major wars. So what is likely is as a result of this pandemic that is going on in the world right now, lot of relationships in the world will be broken, and economy will take a big hit, and there will be a lot of unrest in various countries from people who are affected by the economic downturn, and as a result there'll be some wars. I expect that US, I predicted several years back that US after 2019 will engage in a war with Iran, with Iran as the epicenter, basically a war in the Middle East, where various major countries will be involved. And this is likely to happen over the next decade, most likely within the next few years itself. And at the same time, China is likely to engage in some wars in the Southeast Asia. And my prediction a few years back was that China will break into at least five different nations, just like what happened to USSR in the 1980s. That will happen to China in 2020s. So what will happen is with these wars and the economic downturn, people will start to suffer, and all the unrest that is basically under the surface in Chinese society, because economy is great, people are keeping quiet, their mouth shut. And once economy is bad and there are wars and people don't know what's going on, all the rebellion will come to the surface, and Communist Party will not be able to contain it, and it will break into at least five different countries. Tibet and a few other countries will become independent nations within China.
Tibet will finally get its freedom, you think?
My expectation is in the next decade, Tibet will become an independent country, as well as there will be at least five new countries, five different countries that will be formed from what is known as China today, and China will be significantly weakened. And also, I expect that during this turbulent phase, when there are major wars and economic downturn, India will also face economic downturn because India cannot be completely isolated. It's not completely isolated from the world, but India will mostly avoid the penalty of all these major wars. And while all the big powers are busy in the Middle East and in the Southeast Asia, India will take care of some situation with its neighbors. Let me put it subtly. So India will focus on their neighbors and clean up some things there, some historical mess in the neighborhood. So India will be able to make some progress in their neighborhood and consolidate some things there. But as a result, because India will be least affected, India will emerge very strong at the end of this major war period, just like US did after the Second World War. India will emerge as the next world leader. And one more thing I predicted in 2000 was capitalism. People assume that when in 1980s communism fell, people assume that capitalism won. But capitalism, as we know today, my expectation is that that will also fail in the next decade, and it will be replaced with a new version of capitalism, which will find a good balance between individual greed and collective responsibility towards all the people and even the society and environment. So there'll be a more balanced and dharmic economic model. And as the world struggles with struggling economy, with the falling economy, India will provide leadership by defining what the future looks like, especially from the economy point of view. So I expect that by 2030 and especially by 2034, India will be a clear world leader, both morally and economically and also politically. So that is what I expect in the long run. And Modi is the right person to start the transition phase during a very turbulent period in the world history.
Now, in the very short term, since everybody's under lockdown, what is your prediction for the US and for India in with this COVID crisis? When will we get out of it? Will we get out of it? Is there a vaccine or some remedy around the corner, or is this a long drawn out process?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but I have to call it as I see it. Unfortunately, even though in the end result will be very good for the world as a result of the crisis we are going through, the crisis will not end anytime soon. And people are just looking at this pandemic as a major problem, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just one thing. This is basically a time when environment has decided to take control and clean up the mess that we have created so that a sustainable world will be created for our own well-being and posterity. So I'm afraid that this is not the end. There may be more to come. And also as a result of the economic crisis, there'll be a lot of mess happening in the world. And I expect that in the December of this year, there is a solar eclipse, complete solar eclipse at the middle of December, and also there is a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter on the winter solstice there. So that period, second half of December, is a really critical period. There are likely to be more disastrous events for humanity during that period. So as for this specific pandemic, I don't see it ending soon. I don't expect that there'll be a vaccine found and it will magically work. It will solve the problem. This will drag on for a while, and most likely uh, I think India is doing the right thing by taking it very seriously. But in the end, what I expect, especially with the US, is they will make a pragmatic call that economy is more important than a few lives, and they will, as we already saw, there are some states are partially open. I believe that we will resume economic activity and we'll try to go back to life and pretend that this doesn't exist. And people who are vulnerable populations will protect. They will be left to fend for themselves, and they will protect themselves well. But eventually, we'll reach a state where this virus will spread in the society like water under mat. So it will be there everywhere, and a lot of people will not be affected by it, but there will be a lot of people also dying from this. So even though right now the number is 80,000 or so in US, the number of people who died from this pandemic in US, I expect that the final number will be much higher, something that we can't even imagine, in hundreds of thousands. And I expect a major wave in the June July timeframe after around June 20 or so. Astrologically, I expect another major wave at that period of time. And also in the November, December, I expect another major wave. But in general, I expect a lot of impact in US. But people after some time will basically say, this is something we just have to live with. And also, I think more than the vaccine, the antibody testing will become more prevalent. They will start doing antibody testing to make sure that somebody is clear and give confidence to people that they can go out. But I'm afraid this will be pretty bad for US. But in the end, they will lose both. They will also lose people, and they will also lose the economy. It will not end up saving the economy. Economy will really struggle. And then because of that, there will be a tendency to distract people's attention, and all these wars that I'm talking about in the next few years, they will have their root in this pandemic basically. This is the starting point.
Okay. Now, what is the interim parihara that you suggest for people either in the US or in India to combat the effects of the COVID?
One thing to put bluntly, collectively speaking, I don't think this is the work of some demon or something. This is mother's work. Mother basically, this is mother's play. She wanted to, the path we were on, the modern technology is on, the modern capitalism is on. It is unsustainable. World cannot sustain itself, and after 100 years, this planet will not be left. So this is basically mother's play. This pandemic was not created by a demonic force, but by divine forces to control the situation. So this pandemic, as well as other negative things that are going to happen, are basically a nature's way to create the right balance, a dharmic balance in the world. So collectively, it will be stupid to basically try to stop this. This will, until the required chain reaction has sufficiently been triggered, this will not basically end. So collectively, I don't really think there's much we can do, or we should even try to do. But individually, we can all protect ourselves. Number one, first of all, this is not like the plague or cholera that used to kill a lot of people in the old days. The mortality rate is not very high. It is dangerous for some people, but so first of all, even if somebody is diagnosed with coronavirus, COVID-19, don't basically panic. Think think that, yeah, I'll overcome this. Strengthen your immunity. Have enough exercise. have enough sleep, because exercise and sleep are very important, and take some precautions. There are some good remedies in Ayurveda, and you can take some herbal remedies, and you can also take things like zinc, vitamin D, vitamin C, etc. And in Ayurveda, things like ashwagandha are very helpful. Ashwagandha, gurji is very helpful, also known as giloi. So you can take them as hot tea, or you can take them with honey. There are you can search on internet Ayurvedic remedies for immunity, and you can do it. So work on increasing your immunity and maintain positive attitude, and tell yourself that all this is happening for good in the long run. This will establish a dharmic world in the end, more sustainable dharma basically. Also, world will have peace, but which is sustainable. The peace that we have right now in the world is not sustainable. So there will be sustainable and dharmic peace in the world as a result of this. So tell yourself that this is for good, and protect yourself, and do sadhana for yourself. Especially Ugradevatas like Narsimha, there is a mantra called Ugram Veram Mahavishnu, that is a very powerful mantra for individual protection. And if you are inclined towards Devi, then Durga Saptasati or Saptasloki is very important, very, very useful. So depending on your inclination, especially Ugradevatas are very useful at a time like this. So you can worship any devata that you are interested in. You can also do a fire ritual by yourself. There are a lot of, like mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of Homa manuals on my website. It was Divine Mother's command to my guru to simplify the ritual of Homa, because it has been made so complicated that very few people actually do it, and even the few who do it don't enjoy it. They just do it so mechanically because it's so complicated. So boil down to the basics, what is really essential, and also do it with a sense of understanding of what you're doing and why you are doing. So there are a lot of manuals on my website, and there are thousands of people who are doing it. If you do that, if you do a fire ritual by yourself to any devata that you are interested in, because there are a lot of devatas covered on in the manuals on my website, vedicastrology.org, you can progress individually, protect yourself materially, and progress spiritually. And third, you are contributing to universal increase of dharma. So it is something that I strongly recommend. This is a good time to do it, especially in lockdown. If you have extra time and getting bored, just spend 15 minutes every day doing a homa, and then after that, meditate in front of holy fire. Because meditation is very good, but in front of a bright fire, meditation is even more amplified. It is very, very powerful.
Okay, okay, thank you. Now, what do you think about the elections around the corner in the US? What are your predictions for that?
Yeah. Donald Trump is one thing I want to say. One thing I want to mention is people, a lot of Indians especially, they compare Modi and Trump, and they think that they are very similar people. But I really, astrologically, when I see their horoscope, they are like, they're different like chalk and cheese. The similarities are very superficial, like how they interact with media, some conservative ideology, etc. There are some superficial similarities, but they're like chalk and cheese. They're totally polar opposites of each other. And they may cooperate with each other because they have to. That's a dharma. So Modi may cooperate with Trump because it's his Raja Dharma, but he's a totally different person. Trump is no Modi. Please remember that. Now, based on Trump's chart, based on Ashtotri Dasha, he was running Surya Dasha, very powerful Dasha in the last 5 years. And the Dasha is going to end in June. So I have a strong feeling that he will end up losing this election. And not only that, my expectation is over the next decade or so, because his moon is very weak. He is in Gandanta, he is in deep Gandanta, he's in Nicha, he's eclipsed by Ketu. He will be a frustrated man. He will be almost restricted to some place, maybe a mental asylum or something. He will have a really terrible fortune over the next decade or so. And I don't expect him to win. Unfortunately, we don't have accurate chart of Biden, so I have to spend some time fixing his time, making sure that the time is right to see if he has the potential. But based on US chart itself, I expect that there will be some turbulence in this election. Things will be delayed. Things will not happen normally. In general, my expectation is this year will continue to be a very weird year, a very, very strange and weird year. And the elections probably will be delayed, and the results will be surprising in the end. But I don't anticipate that Trump will continue to be president after this election. But the end will be very, very aggressive and violent.
Okay, okay. Uh, so for young people that need to get into Jyotisha, and people like you who've gotten in by just out of interest, but then there are some things that we can do with institutions and with structure to get young people interested in Jyotisham and bring it out as and do more research and bring it out as a shastra. Now, what would you suggest we do as individuals, individual families, and as society, especially in India? How do we revive this field?
So, as a society, I think society can really encourage astrology. And if you find a good astrologer, basically, even if, see, a lot of astrologers are commercial, but some of the good astrologers are not commercial. For example, my father never took any specific fee. Now if you go to an astrologer, there is a fee based on how many minutes you spend. My father, basically, you come, he answers you. Whatever you want to give, you give. I am the same way. I'm totally non-commercial. But there are a lot of good astrologers who are non-commercial. Try to encourage them. Try to basically see. I have a good job, so I don't need my livelihood from astrology. But we need to encourage, create a class of astrologers who are good, non-commercial, and they get enough livelihood through astrology alone. So for that, society has a role, and also government has a role. And as individuals, if you are young and interested and curious about astrology, do get into astrology. Do learn astrology. And there are a lot of books. Like I said, Dr. B.V. Raman's books, even though he talks about the superficial aspects of astrology, they give you very good grounding. So read those books. And there are a lot of classics, but definitely Bruhat Parasara Horosastram is a really important book to have. And there are a lot of books, but that's really the magnum opus that you should really study. And for those who only know English and not Sanskrit and want a quick start, there is a book that I wrote, published by Sagar Publications. I later worked with the publication and also made it available free online. So if you go to my website, vedicastrologer.org, you can download the free ebook. It's called Vedic Astrology: An Integrated Approach. It covers various aspects of astrology and it covers them in a scientific way. It is written like a science textbook with like clear examples, exercises, etc. So you can study that. And also, if you go to my website, there is 400 hours of material, teaching from scratch to people who did not know. So there are some MP3s worth of 400 hours material. So people can can learn that also. But after I taught all that, wrote the book and taught, I have reformed my understanding and some of the subtleties that were incorrectly interpreted by people before me. I have reformed those. So this research will go on. But like I said, research needs to go on. There are a lot of missing links and there are some things that are not correctly understood. So please try to do some research. There are two aspects of research. One is looking at the Sanskrit text and interpreting it fresh and trying various interpretations practically. And second is just practical exploration. Try various charts and see what is working, what is not working, etc. And the other thing is do a lot of sadhana. Make sure that you spend enough time doing some spiritual sadhana. It can be meditation, it can be a homa, it can be visiting temples, it can be service to people. But make sure you do enough sadhana. The other thing I couldn't emphasize more is it is very useful to know Sanskrita and then try to read the text in Sanskrita itself because sometimes when you see an English translation, the subtlety of the meaning may be lost. The words basically don't mean the same thing when you use a different language. The connotation is not the same. And sometimes it's not just missing the connotation, the actual meaning is coded in a double meaning of a word. I'll give you a very simple example that really drives this point home. In astrology, there are 12 houses. Okay, from the Lagna, you count 12 signs as 12 houses. The Sanskrita word for this is bhava. Okay, and then Parasara taught some mathematical manipulation of each house. You do some mathematical formula and come up with something known as pada for that house. Each house, there is a fourth house, fourth pada, third house, third pada, etc. And the pada may be in a different sign. And he said, use the fourth house and this pada to see somebody's vehicles, comforts from vehicles, etc. So he did not say which is what, what is the difference between them. He just used them interchangeably. But obviously, if there are two parameters, they must show different things. And the rishis never really, like I said earlier, they don't spoon feed you. And it's not clearly taught by anybody. One day it struck me when I was looking at the words that he used in Sanskrita. The words are bhava and pada. What does pada mean? It has a lot of meanings like leg, etc. But one clear meaning is pada means word and bhava means meaning. So there is a link between them, meaning and word. What is the link between them? Word is tangible. You can hear the words I'm saying. They're very tangible, clear, external. Whereas meaning is internal, it is intangible, it is inside my mind. So when you look at the fourth house, the happiness from the vehicle is internal. So that is like bhava, that must be seen from the bhava of the fourth, not the pada. Whereas the actual vehicle somebody drives is the pada. So fourth pada should be seen for actually seeing the external vehicle somebody drives. Of course, just like you try to understand the meaning in my mind by using the words that I am uttering, we see external things. If somebody has a BMW, we assume that he is happy. He may not be. If somebody has a bicycle only, we assume he is unhappy with the vehicle. He may be very happy. So you can distinguish all these things. So this is just an example. Like this, when it clicks to you, you see the link between the words, and you see, oh, this is what he must mean. Like this, whether it's Jyotisha or Veda or various Vedangas, rishis were never direct. They basically taught in a coded way, so that there are multiple layers of meaning. And depending on your patrata, depending on your maturity, spiritual and intellectual maturity, the right meaning will reveal to you at the right time. So from that point of view, I can't encourage younger people enough to learn Sanskrit. And if I did not have knowledge of Sanskrit at a young age, and if I was just an engineer, I wouldn't have really done whatever I did in Jyotisha. So it is really important to learn Sanskrita and read the Mola Granthas, which are in Sanskrita.
Thank you so much for your time. Namaste for coming here and giving us a fantastic discussion and your views, your predictions. We hope to have you soon again. And thanks again for your time, Shri Narasimha Rao. It was a pleasure to talk to you this morning. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Namaste to all of you.
Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.